just activated the pager at the bar.
PD is getting dispatch from center, right?
Negative, they just dispatched it over the radio, special event one. Want you guys to go ahead?
You okay?
Davison Township Police Department will respond to the scene. This incident involves two motor vehicles with a K injury. K injury means it's a fatal accident. Appears to be three occupants in each vehicle for a total of 6 personnel. Officers responding to the scene, fire personnel will immediately check for injuries and to see what further medical and police and or fire for traffic control are needed at the scene.
Identification on both vehicles.
Davison Fire is on scene now. They're currently looking at the personnel, seeing what injuries there are, calling for additional medical personnel, ambulances, paramedics, and also the police officers. Davison Township Police Department is the first on scene. He's checking an occupant that appears to be ejected from the vehicle.
Sir, do you hear me?
Appears to be no response from the individual, male. Appears to be teenage.
On the ground, not breathing. No heart rate.
Officer just advised that the subject that was ejected from the car has no pulse and is not breathing. He's notified 911 of that and is now checking for further injuries on the vehicles or occupants of vehicles that may be still alive.
Hello? Passenger, what happened?
Fire personnel has just requested the Jaws of Life. The Jaws of Life are a tool used by the fire department to extricate occupants from the vehicle. This is done when occupants are either stuck in the vehicle or the doors won't open so that they can get them out to stabilize the victims, to reduce further injuries such as neck injuries and things like that. Because of the nature of the scene and the amount of victims, assisting officers from Richfield Township and Davison City will be arriving on scene to assist with traffic control and to assist with interviewing witnesses and dealing with the injured personnel. Due to the nature of the injury with the K injury, this does become a crime scene. Officers will be called out to piece the crash together, determine speeds of vehicle, find out who was at fault, and also to reconstruct the crash using measurements and crush damage on the vehicle to determine how fast each vehicle was going. The victim that's deceased is going to be covered up. This is to protect the graphic nature from the public, also to protect from contaminants getting on the deceased person. Again, this is a crime scene, so spectators will be asked to stay back. They need to protect for evidence such as skid marks, acceleration marks, gouge marks in the pavement from the collision itself. The driver of the green vehicle appears to be intoxicated. Officers are able to determine that because of his speech. Oftentimes, a person that's intoxicated because of alcohol and/or drugs, or a combination of both, their speech will be slurred, their eyes will be red and glassy, and their balance will be off. When they're asked to look for their driver's license, things like that, they'll fumble through the paperwork, which is a lack of coordination. Being that there's so many victims, there are oftentimes issues within the ambulance personnel here. Sometimes they come from a long distance away. The jaws of life are being used on the red car here. They have to cut through the door to get the occupants out. Again, this is done so that the emergency personnel can get access to the occupants. And we don't want to have any further injuries. There'll be somebody in there holding the necks, making sure that their cervical collar are in place so that there aren't additional injuries. Officers will begin to interview witnesses of the cars to figure out exactly what happened, who was driving, how fast they were going, where they're coming from, if there was alcohol or drugs involved. The officers, or the fire department's going to use the jaws of life as well on the green vehicle, which is the at-fault vehicle, to get to the rear occupant. Officer Rendon from Davison Township appears to be talking with the at-fault driver, making contact with him to find out where he was coming from, what's going on, to see if he's intoxicated or not. Well, students need to be aware that somebody can be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. It doesn't have to be necessarily illegal drugs. It can be prescription drugs as well. In this case here, I believe it is alcohol, and he's doing sobriety tests now. This helps the officer determine, how much alcohol the driver actually had. This test that he's doing now is a balance test. Again, somebody that's under the influence lacks coordination and lacks balance. The next sobriety test is called the heel-to-toe test. The driver will be given a set of steps, such as walking 9 steps heel-to-toe out, turn around, and walk so many steps back. Again, this is balance and coordination. And as you can see, the driver is clearly having a difficulty with his balance. Generally, an intoxicated person will also have red, glassy eyes, speech will be slurred, and they'll smell of intoxicants. The fire department was able to remove the door for the red vehicle, which is the non-at-fault vehicle. They're going to remove the driver from the vehicle. The C collar isn't in place to reduce cervical injuries. Officer Rendon is getting a PBT. It's a preliminary breath test. This tool is used to check the amount of alcohol in the subject's blood, or breath, I should say. Officer Rendon determined that the driver is in fact intoxicated. That means that he is responsible for the death of a human. The charge would be operating while intoxicated. It's a serious felony. He could be looking at least 15 years in prison, if not more. The subject was arrested. Because of the amount of damage to these vehicles, it's not easy to get these occupants out. I mean, there's what they call the golden hour to get individuals to the hospital to get them medical care. And I've been on scenes that they've been trapped in the vehicle for over 2 hours, and it certainly makes it difficult for medical to provide medical. There are fluids leaking from the vehicle. The fire personnel are here as well to stand by with the hose in case the fluids catch on fire. They're also here, obviously, for the safety of the officers in case that happens, and the occupants. In a small community like we have, the word flies that there's been a serious injury crash and a fatal accident. Many times people in the community try to rush to the scene to see what's going on, and it creates a problem for law enforcement trying to keep these people back. Again, this is a crime scene, and people are asked to stay back because it needs to be pieced together as far as to protect evidence and things like that. The driver has very little injuries. He was checked by medical personnel and he's cleared. He will be lodged tonight in the Genesee County Jail. Officers will be seeking charges for OWI causing death. occupant from the rear of the green vehicle has been removed on backboard and replaced in the ambulance. There's still one remaining occupant in the red vehicle. Fire department's asking for 2 more people to help remove the roof of the red vehicle and to remove the occupant from the vehicle.
Listen, we got 3 guys on that side, on that side. We're gonna pick it up and carry it that way. Sir. Huh? What way you take that way? You know, whatever way you want to take it.
After the occupants are removed from the vehicle, the officers will begin to piece this crash scene together, have their accident reconstructionists respond to the scene. They'll measure tire skid marks, acceleration marks, crush damage. They'll take photos of the vehicle. They'll look at speedometers, determine, sometimes they lock in place at collisions. They'll also check the gear shifter to see what gear they're in. Oftentimes it's a stick shift and they'll be in a high gear, or even sometimes in neutral. Occupant damage if they don't have seatbelts on. Victims fly around inside the vehicle and do things like gear shifters and things like that.
Right out here on the scene. Out here on the your car. Hey, just see how we're bringing it up on the back.
Again, the fire personnel are taking every care that they can, every bit of care they can. Injuries are often internal,
You gotta pull up on
and
his arms.
moving the body could increase
Upward down.
the damage. Oftentimes there's internal organ damage.
Here, hold it from the front. Ready? Watch his shoulder. There. Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Straighten him out, straighten him out. Bring him down a little bit.
The last occupant was removed from the vehicle. going to start the reconstruction process, going to start taking photos.
All the funeral homes that removed the deceased.
And the at-fault driver that's in custody is going to be transported to the jail at this time. These vehicles will be towed to an inside storage facility so that they can be analyzed after they leave the scene. There's computer information that are inside the vehicle that the officers are able to plug into, which will give speed, braking distance, steering control, airbag deployment, seat position, and that data will be retrieved from the vehicles once they're back at the impound lot. They'll also check the tires to make sure that the tires were intact and working order. They'll check brakes to make sure that those were in working order. The scene cleanup now begins. They're going to start cleaning up some of the fluids. This vehicle, the at-fault vehicle, was leaking antifreeze, so they're going to get that stuff cleared up off the pavement. Other victims are going to be going to Hurley Hospital. They have a good trauma unit there. They're going to take a look at their injuries. After the photographs are complete of the scene, the body will be removed by the ambulance, funeral home service, and be taken to the hospital where an autopsy will be performed. The autopsy will give the actual cause of death, whether or not it was chest injuries, head injuries, ruptured arteries, and so on. Looks like Allen Funeral Home is here to remove the body from the scene.
Frank. You guys want to put the bag on this side and then just roll them into it?
Radio Chief Jim. Engine 14 available on location. 13 will be shortly. 16 still out of service.
You want to go get your car?
Yeah.
Oh, brother.
Again, once the body's removed, it'll be transported to Hurley Hospital where the morgue's at, and the autopsy will be done by a pathologist to determine cause of death. And this information is used for court purposes to find out, to see if there was any other ailments that may have contributed to death, because charges are pending on the driver.
Stevie, open up that top a little bit. It's like a normal car. You just dump it in.
No, it's as far as that heat gun, you gotta pull them out, and then you gotta make sure the legs stay down. It's all right there.
Yeah, I see. It's probably a better plan. I'll put your blanket over.
All the way. All the way.
Once everybody's cleared from the scene, the tow trucks will come in and tow the vehicles back to the impound lot, and the scene cleanup will be completed.
I think it's. Is there an on button?
Good morning. Obviously, this is serious. This is the worst thing that we can go to right here is a child that was innocent, was killed by a drunk driver, somebody under the influence of drugs, texting, screwing off in a car, laughing about something. You guys are all young. You have a lot of choices to make. When you're growing up, you learn from your mistakes. You can't learn from a mistake when you're not around. This is the worst mistake you can make right here. 30 seconds before this crash, these kids were coming home. They didn't make it. Police officers have to go to the house.
Tell the parents they're not going to make it. All these people out here, the firemen, the ambulance, police officers, we try and protect and serve, we try and bring people home. We pull you over in the middle of the night for having a license plate light out. You don't like it. We find out that you were drunk, under the influence of drugs. We just stopped you from crashing into a tree, a ditch, a car, hurting somebody that shouldn't have been hurt. Think about it. 11,000 people die in the U.S. because of alcohol and drug-related crashes. In Michigan, 357 died in 2010. Every day somebody dies as a result of this type of crash, just in this state. In the U.S., from the time that you left your classroom to right now, somebody died as a result of alcohol or drugs. A lot of times we see the drunk driver is not the victim. A lot of times it's the innocent. Make good choices, you can't come back. This is one mistake you can't learn from. I want you to put yourself on your parents' porch in the middle of the night, even though you can't because you're deceased. It wasn't your fault. Could have been your buddy's fault. Your buddy was driving, you were a passenger. He thought he was okay to drive. Obviously it wasn't. Put yourself on your parents' porch. Midnight. I'm going to leave you with this. Think of this now. Imagine this sight. A police officer knocking on your parents' door in the middle of the night. Your parents turn on the light and open the door, and at that instant their stomach sinks as they start to mourn. The officer's face tells it all, and no words have yet been spoken. Your parents know, and their hearts are broken. Your mother and father fall to their knees and embrace as a tear from a hardened officer runs down his face. The officer's voice cracks when he says goodbye. He turns and walks away, asking himself why. The drunk driver survived and has a life left to enjoy, while your parents will forever in grief, live in grief from the loss of their little girl, little boy. Take that with you if you learn anything. If we can change one person to make a good choice, we've done our job. Thank you.
Good morning. My recollection of a true story as the judge here in Davison. After the crash comes the silence of death. And I want you to go back and take you back before the silence. A telephone ringing in the middle of the night, waking you with a loud, shrill insistence. It startles you, it frightens you, and it's never good news. It startles me. And my phone often rings in the middle of the night at 2, 3, and 4 o'clock. My heart races as I reach for the phone. An officer is on the other end of the line. This nighttime occurrence is a common thing for a judge, but I never get used to it. Because someone's child, one whose life has just begun in earnest, is broken and dying on the side of a road that you and I travel most every day. An ambulance is screaming in the background. The voice of the officer breaks on the phone as he asks to come to my home for a warrant that will be used to check for blood alcohol. He already knows that the young woman is unlikely to live. He's not a doctor, but he's seen enough of the clash of steel and flesh to know that she will not make it. When the officers arrive at my home, they are ashen-faced. One collapses in my arms. They were unable to get a hold of a Catholic priest. They're professionals, but they also have children. One of the officers has held the young victim's head gently in his arms while she cried out in pain for her mother. And her life flowed out onto the pavement while he tried to calm her dying fears. The officers have just come from her parents' home, where the screams and sobs have sliced their lives in two. And nothing from that moment under the porch light until eternity will ever again be the same for that family. They can't bear to share the real horror of the terror in her eyes, of her cries, of the ugliness of dying. Now the sirens are silent. The flashing lights that bounced off the twisted metal are dimmed. The shouts and sounds of running police boots have died away. And the blood of her life is washed into the gutters. And you and I are standing here this morning in silence. I hate those calls in the middle of the night because I know how ugly it all is. And I know that the ugliness and pain that played out on the roadside is only the first chapter of pain and grief for some family, just like yours and just like mine. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end with my simplest and shortest judicial sermon. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. It's not complicated. So I want you to go and do what's right and not be the cause of a call in the middle of the night. If you would all return quietly to your classes, this concludes our program.